Hello, my friends. Way back in time when the Agile Manifesto was put together, Scrum shot off like a rocket. And the reason is this, in my mind, these principles were great, but the transparency of being able to hang these principles on different parts of a framework was not as explicitly transparent in the other methods as it is in Scrum. Scrum is just the right formula for people to understand how those principles can come to life through daily practices, of course, with the right mindset. So when you take a look at what is on page 8 and 9 in this book, which is the Agile Manifesto principles and the values, and then you take a look at what is in this book, the Pmbok Guide, 7th edition, what you need for this one is understanding how those principles that you read in, the 12 of them in the Pembok Guide 7th edition, how those can be brought to life through a framework. And that is one of the missing pieces. And I really want to focus on that today because I know as some of you are reading the 7th edition, you're beginning to read the principles in your mind, you're like, but how, especially those of you that are new to this whole PMI journey, PMP and stuff. So what I want to do today is I would like to bridge the world that you're used to hearing about in the Agile Practice Guide, in the values and the principles talked about on page 8 and 9. And I want to bridge that with a lot of the information, the principles talked about in the 7th edition, okay? And to do that, I'm going to use an invention of mine called the process group Pentagon. It's a simple idea of the 5 process groups, but it poses a challenge to you in being able to relate the areas talked about in the 7th edition within the process group framework, relate those back to the principles that are talked about, stewardship, leadership, and things like that. But first and foremost, before you begin challenging yourself about the principles, that's next. But before we get to the principles challenge, I want you to take this Pentagon challenge, and I'm going to show you what that Pentagon challenge is right now. So here is the Pembok Guide, 5 process groups put into this idea of mine. So here we go. It's a very simple framework. 5 process groups. You've probably heard the mnemonic, I prefer extra money in cash. Have you heard that before? Or you've heard, I prefer eating mangoes chilled. That is how you can remember the 5 process groups first and foremost. So here we go. Start off on your blank piece of paper with a pentagon. And for each edge of the pentagon, you are going to put one of the 5 process groups. So initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Okay. Now, this is a method that you must follow to the letter when you're doing this to be able to get the most from it. So as you put down your initiating on the paper, ask yourself, what exactly is initiating? Give it a 10-second high-level definition, but make sure you know what it is, okay? Anything you put on your paper, you got to make sure you know what it is. Initiating is where the project is authorized. We create a project charter and we identify stakeholders. That's sufficient. Planning. This is where all the subsidiary plans and baselines are integrated. This is also where they're planned in the very first place. So We plan out all the different knowledge areas. We decide how we are going to manage the project, and we put that together into a project management plan. Executing. This is where the project management plan is carried out. This is where work is done, deliverables are created, the team is working, the team is synergizing, and this is where the work is being managed overall. Monitoring and controlling. This is where the overall monitoring and controlling of the project work is done. Reports are created and metrics are used to take measurements, and those measurements are then intelligently looked at to decipher the state of the project. They are put into a work performance report, and that could be shared with stakeholders. Last but not least, we have closing. This refers to closing out either an entire project or maybe a phase in a project. In order to do this, we need to understand what our original objectives were. We're going to have a final report to assess if we really met our goal, our objectives, to also explore if the benefits we were looking for have been realized, or if we expect them to be realized in the future, then we also want to take note of that. And those are the 5 process groups. But my challenge to you is draw out the Pentagon daily, okay? And then go through the interrelationships, right? But before you do the interrelationships, ask yourself, do I know what these are? What is initiating? What is planning? And the more you study, I want you to add more and more content till you get to about a minute or 2 of explaining each one. That's the challenge, okay? So take up the challenge, share this with your friends. Those of you who are getting ready for the exam, take the challenge. This is just step 1 of the challenge. It's going to be a lot more. See you in the next episode.